For over 3 decades, I was known as Imam Yusuf Almahdi, a respected spiritual leader in a Persian Gulf community. My life revolved around constant prayer, in-depth study of the Quran, and religious guidance to my followers. I spoke with firmness and passion, preaching with all the fervor I carried in my heart, feeling the weight of responsibility upon my shoulders as if it were a sacred mission sent by Allah. Since childhood, I grew up convinced that there was only one absolute truth, my Islamic faith, and that any deviation from it meant error, perdition, and damnation. In my preaching, I did not spare Christians. I pointed out their flaws, warned my people about the dangers of the cross and what I saw as false doctrines. It was a source of pride for me to feel that I defended the purity of faith and protected my people from corrupting influences. However, all my religious certainty and spiritual steadfastness were tested in a way I could never have imagined. It was one June night that everything changed radically. I was in the United States, in Austin, Texas, where I had lived for 2 years thanks to a scholarship to study environmental engineering. My only daughter, Noura, also lived there. My wife had passed away early, leaving me with profound pain. But it was Noura's presence and love that gave me the strength to carry on, to move forward even in the face of longing and hardship. Despite the distance, I spoke to her every day, demanding that she tell me about her fasting, her prayers, her life. She was strict, but her affection never failed to soften my hardness. That fateful night, her call came briefly and worrisomely. She told me in a tense voice, "Dad, it's raining really hard here. The campus is flooding rapidly. The police are asking us to go to the upper floors because the water is flooding the buildings." Suddenly, the call dropped and I couldn't get through. I desperately tried to call back, but the line was dead with no signal. I called the embassy, friends in the United States, and followed the news online and on television, but it was pure chaos. Images showed raging floods, cars being swept away, buildings surrounded by water, and people trapped with no way out, until CNN aired an aerial photo of the campus where Noura studied, completely surrounded by dark, threatening waters. My heart sank in that instant. It was the first time in my life I felt true fear, not fear of the world's threats nor the spiritual fear of judgment, but a raw, brutal fear of losing everything I loved most, of losing my daughter. I spent the entire night awake, kneeling on the living room rug, trying to pray as I always had, but the words seemed empty, meaningless. I opened my mouth to recite verses from the Quran that I had memorized decades ago, but nothing came out. It was as if my voice had been stolen, my faith silenced. The silence of the house seemed to amplify the storm outside and the torment I felt inside. I paced back and forth, sweating coldly, my chest tight, unable to find peace. I went to my office, where I kept an old copy of the Quran, a book that had been with me since I was young, open on a high shelf. I knelt before it, and for the first time, I found no comfort or answers. I prayed to Allah, begged with all the intensity I'd learned since childhood, but it seemed no one was listening. It was in that moment of utter despair and silence, that something inside me broke. I murmured a phrase I never imagined I'd say. "If there's anyone listening beyond what I know, please save my daughter. Even if I have to meet the one I've denied my entire life." I didn't even know exactly what I was saying. I just felt heartbroken that if there were a true God, He wouldn't allow my daughter to die like this. It was pure despair. No theology, no fiery speeches, no pride. Just a father on his knees in the darkness, crying out for mercy. It was after this silent prayer, this sincere plea, that everything began to change. I fell asleep right there, exhausted and unaware, as if the weight of that night had overcome me. When I woke, I wasn't sure if I was still dreaming or if reality had shifted. The room looked the same, but a strange, soft light streamed in through the window, despite it being early morning. Then my eyes fell upon a figure. He stood near the door, wearing a simple, unadorned white robe, similar to those worn on holy days. Something about that moment transcended everything I had ever known. What struck me most about that apparition were his eyes. They weren't ordinary eyes. I can't say they were beautiful in the traditional sense, but there was something in them that pierced the soul, that seemed to see beyond the surface, beyond everything I knew. I was completely paralyzed by that gaze. I couldn't utter a single word. Curiously, I felt no fear, even though I didn't understand any of it. It was as if I were facing something that transcended logic, something sacred and profound. He stared at me for what seemed like an eternity, a silence filled with meaning between us, until finally he spoke, his voice calm, without accent, without anger, without judgment, just a firm and inevitable statement. "You called me, and I came. Your daughter will live, but now it is your soul that must be saved." Those words fell on me like a silent thunderclap. There was no accusation, no rebuke, just a truth that could not be ignored. And just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned, walked toward the door, and disappeared into the darkness, as if he had never been there. When I woke, my heart was racing, my hands were shaking, and I sat there motionless, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Had it all been a dream, a hallucination, a vision, or even a sign of my tired mind? But something inside me knew it was real. I was certain of it. I sat in that room for hours, immersed in a mixture of confusion and strange peace. When I finally got up, I went straight to the bathroom, washed my face, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. What I saw wasn't just my tired face, with dark circles and eyes swollen from crying, but something deeper. It was as if a part of me had been ripped away, or perhaps revealed. My chest felt strangely light, accompanied by a heaviness I couldn't explain. I grabbed my cell phone, still without signal, and turned on the television. The channels continued to show images of the disaster. Helicopters circling overhead, police cars rushing past, people crying, families in despair. The reporter announced that the death toll was rising, and with each update my heart sank deeper. But strangely, something inside me prevented despair from consuming me again. I didn't know if it came from exhaustion or a new faith that was beginning to emerge. But the phrase I had heard repeated incessantly in my mind, "Your daughter will live." I repeated it as if it were a sacred promise, something I had no right to claim, but something that had been given to me. And in that moment, the tears came. I cried like I'd never cried before. I didn't hide my tears. I cried as a father, as a broken man, as someone with nothing left to lose. They were pure tears of surrender and immense love. Almost at dawn, my cell phone vibrated. The number was unknown, American. I answered without hesitation, and on the other end came the emotional voice of a woman. She introduced herself as the coordinator of a volunteer rescue team affiliated with a local church. With a trembling voice, she explained that they had managed to access a completely flooded area of the campus and that they had found several students trapped in a classroom. Among them, my daughter Noura. She was alive. I was informed that some young Christians had formed a human chain to pull them out of the water, one by one, risking their lives to save those inside. The woman told me that Noura was weak, dehydrated, but conscious. Before she passed out, she had held the hand of one of these young men and whispered, "Jesus was with me." That simple gesture broke me completely. My legs gave way and I fell to my knees on the living room floor. My voice failed, the words faded, and all that remained was a deep sob, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Deep down, I knew it was no mere coincidence. It was an answer, an intervention I never imagined I would receive. I remained there kneeling for a long time. I don't know how long exactly, only that the floor was wet with my tears, and that the soft light of the morning sun was beginning to filter through the window, illuminating the shelves filled with the books I had studied for decades. In that moment, everything I'd learned, all those sermons I'd recited with such certainty, seemed distant, as if they belonged to another life. I picked up my phone again and saw a voicemail from my daughter. Her voice, alive, real, calling me Dad. Her voice was faint, almost whispered, but absolutely clear and filled with emotion. She said, "Father, I saw him. I know it may seem crazy, almost impossible to believe, but I saw him there in the middle of the water, the moment I thought it would all end." I listened intently, each word like a breath of hope piercing my aching heart. She continued, "He appeared to me, reached out his hand, and brought me a peace I had never felt before. There was no fear, no pain, just a deep tranquility, as if everything was right in that moment. He told me you were praying for me and that he would come for me." Upon hearing that, my entire body began to tremble. My mind tried to rationalize, to seek a logical explanation, a scientific justification for that experience. But deep down, a certainty took hold of me. It was real, too real to be made up, too true to be just a coincidence. In the days that followed, my body returned to its normal routine, but my soul no longer participated in the prayers in the same way. I performed the rituals, but my heart was elsewhere. I was still, in the eyes of many, an imam. However, something profound had changed within me, and this transformation began to show to those who observed me closely. In meetings, my voice no longer carried the same authority or strength as before. Some friends and congregants noticed my unusual silence, my distance. I avoided any controversial topics, and most importantly, I could no longer attack Christians as vehemently as I once had. A close friend, concerned, once confronted me. "Yusuf, you're different. What's happening to you?" I responded evasively, saying only that I was tired, but the truth was that I was experiencing a profound inner crisis, a storm I didn't know how to control. I began to withdraw into myself, seeking refuge in my office at night, like a fugitive from myself. It was there, alone and restless, that I did something I never imagined I would do. I picked up an old Bible, a copy I kept among my books for apologetic research, and with trembling hands I began to read the Gospels. Not as an enemy, but as someone who perhaps, just perhaps, had been visited by the one I had rejected all my life. At first I read reluctantly, as if each verse were a blade cutting through the convictions I had carried for so many years. Yet along with the pain, there was something strange, a sense of familiarity I couldn't explain. Jesus' words didn't come as an attack nor as a relentless imposition. They were firm, yes, but they overflowed with mercy, a deep, inexplicable love that began to resonate within my heart. One night, as I read the story of the man whose daughter was healed from a distance, simply by his faith, I couldn't hold back the tears. It was as if I were living that story, as if it were my own reality. The more I read, the more I understood that Jesus wasn't the enemy I imagined. He wasn't a threat, but rather an answer. An answer to that desperate prayer I'd prayed in the darkness when I'd set aside all pride and theology and simply asked, "Save my daughter." It was as if he had heard me, even though I didn't even know his name. But guilt began to eat away at me. I remembered the harsh sermons I'd delivered against Christianity, the times I'd raised my voice to condemn those who professed another faith, the harsh, hateful words I'd used without thinking. I felt ashamed. How could I have been so blind? How could I have dismissed people who, perhaps, were simply seeking to live their faith sincerely? From that moment on, I began avoiding public prayers and making excuses not to lead services. Outwardly, I looked the same, but my soul was in pieces, in ruins. And it was in that moment, in the silence of that night, that I made the hardest decision of my life, to call my daughter and ask if she was safe in that place. She said yes, that the church that rescued her had welcomed her with love and care. So with a heavy heart, I said, "I need to see you, but I can't tell anyone. Not here or there. Let's meet in secret." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then she answered, her voice calm and firm. "I already knew you were coming. Jesus warned me. I traveled in secret, took a connecting flight, didn't tell anyone, and brought only a backpack with light clothes." My heart felt like it was hammering in my chest, as if I were about to commit a serious crime. And perhaps in the eyes of my community, that was exactly what I was doing. The feeling of betraying everything that had defined me for over 30 years was overwhelming. But as I stepped onto American soil, a profound relief washed over me. For the first time in decades, I was leaving behind the world that had shaped me, the place where I grew up and where I had built my entire spiritual identity. The air felt different, lighter, and I took a deep breath, trying to absorb every sensation of this new reality. The taxi that took me to the house was simple, a wooden building located on the outskirts of Austin, surrounded by a modest and peaceful backyard. Over the door hung a cross, a symbol I would have rejected not long ago, but which now represented the security my daughter needed. This house had been prepared by the local church to shelter Noura until she could fully recover. When the door opened and she saw me, something broke inside me. She ran into my arms and hugged me so tightly that I simply collapsed. Tears flowed freely, and I wept on her shoulder like a child, like someone finally finding refuge after a long storm. There was no longer room for pride or shame, only love and relief. We sat together on the porch, the afternoon sun warming our faces, and I asked her to tell me everything, from the moment the water began to flood the building until the rescue. She spoke slowly, as if still trying to process the intensity of what she had experienced. She said that when the water reached the classroom, she and other girls tried to hold onto tables and climb onto chairs to escape the flood. The power suddenly went out, plunging everything into complete darkness, and panic gripped everyone there. It was at that moment that Noura began to pray, but not with memorized words or learned rituals. It was a simple prayer, offered with an open and pure heart, a sincere plea for help. And it was then that she felt a different presence, a calm, serene force that seemed to suspend time and space within that chaos. She said that amidst the darkness, she saw a man standing between them, enveloped in a soft light invisible to everyone else. Only she could see him. He approached, extended his hand, and said something that made my chest tighten. "Your father prayed, and I came to get you." As she narrated, my eyes filled with silent tears. I knew with all the certainty in the world that this man was the same one who had visited me that fateful morning. The words, the presence, the peace he exuded, everything matched perfectly. It was impossible to deny what had happened. I spent that entire week in that house with my daughter. We were secluded, without going out or speaking to anyone. We spent our time praying, crying, and reading the Gospels together, like two beginners discovering something forbidden yet essential to their lives. Each word seemed to fit together perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle I had kept hidden for years. I then discovered that I wasn't the only one facing doubts, questions, and internal conflicts. Noura felt all of these things too, but she had never had the courage to share them with me for fear of hurting me. Now here we were, free, but still fearful of what might happen if the world learned of our transformation. The biggest surprise of that week was when she asked me, her voice trembling, "Dad, do you think you've been saved too?" I looked into her eyes and with a choked voice I replied, "I'm not sure what happened to me, Noura, but I know I'll never be the same again." It was the first time in my life I'd spoken about faith without resorting to memorized speeches, without hiding what I truly felt. He was simply a repentant father, acknowledging that he'd been touched by something I'd never fully understood. At the end of that week, I received an unexpected call. It was the brother of a member of the local mosque, concerned about my disappearance. His voice was suspicious, and he asked me directly what was going on. He said some people had already started spreading rumors, insinuating that something strange was happening to me. I realized there was no turning back. Even if I tried to deny it, the truth would come out sooner or later. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and looked at Noura, feeling that a new chapter had begun in our lives, one marked by faith, hope, and above all, truth. We had to make a decision right then. I knew there was no turning back for me. My daughter remained silent for a few seconds, and then, with a calm firmness in her voice, she said, "Then let's start a new life here." These words seemed simple, almost natural, but in truth they carried enormous weight. It was the beginning of something I never imagined I would experience. Leaving behind everything I knew, my land, my position, my history, my reputation built over decades. It was a choice as painful as it was necessary. But in that moment, more than anything, I simply wanted to truly live, to feel the freedom of a life guided by something greater than all the certainties I already held. I knew, deep down in my soul, that no other truth could be greater than the one that visited me that night of despair, in that prayer uttered in the dark. In the following days, we began the legal process so my daughter and I could remain in the United States. Everything was done with the discretion the situation demanded, thanks to the help of local church members who understood the magnitude of our challenge without question or pressure. They welcomed us with a quiet, almost sacred respect that touched me deeply. All my life, I had seen Christians as enemies, as the opposite of what I believed, but there they were, feeding me, helping me fill out forms, offering shelter and comfort when I felt most lost. A woman named Grace appeared one night with a brand new blanket and said simply, "You're welcome. We're here, brother. God has already started something beautiful in your life." I could only nod, holding back the tears that wanted to escape. Each of their gestures was tearing down, brick by brick, the wall I had built around my heart my entire life. For the first time, I began to experience what unconditional love is. A love that demands nothing in return, doesn't accuse, doesn't condemn, just reaches out and welcomes. Eventually, we left the shelter and moved to a smaller town. We rented a modest apartment with 2 bedrooms and a small living room, simple but enough for the 2 of us. Noura managed to transfer to a nearby university and resumed her studies, while I began working translating religious texts, both Islamic and Christian. At the same time, I studied, read, and sought to rebuild my faith from scratch brick by brick. It wasn't easy. I went through profound crises, nightmares, and agonizing doubts. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, fearing I'd made an irreparable mistake. But through it all, I clung to the image of that man in the classroom, to the hand that reached out to my daughter in the water, to the peace that flooded my heart that morning after the unexpected visit. This certainty, however fragile, accompanied me, sustained me, constantly appearing in the most difficult moments. As time passed, I met other ex-Muslims who had gone through similar journeys. I realized I wasn't alone, that there were other hearts and souls who, like me, had been touched by something greater. This gave me the strength to keep going, to not give up. Today, I'm no longer the Imam I used to be. The Yusuf of old is gone. Now I'm simply a father, a man renewed by faith in Jesus. And that for me is enough. Weeks have passed since it all happened, but I still wake up every day with a strange feeling, as if I'm experiencing something I can't put into words. I can't call it a dream, because it was too real to be just imagination. And I don't know if I have the courage to call it a miracle, because I'm still trying to comprehend everything that happened that night. All I know is that since then, I'm no longer the same man. My daughter is alive, and that alone would justify all the change. But it wasn't just her who was saved. I was saved too. Not from drowning, but from myself, from the blindness, pride, and rigidity that prevented me from seeing beyond what my tradition taught me. Today, when I close my eyes, I still see that man's face, the deep calm in his eyes, the gentle firmness in his voice. Your daughter will live, but now it is her soul that must be saved. These words echo within me every day and still send chills down my spine. I live in hiding. I still don't have the courage to tell my family or anyone in the community I come from. If they knew I had abandoned my position as Imam, that I was reading the Gospels, that I prayed in the name of Jesus, that would be my sentence, my exclusion, my condemnation. But even so, nothing could be truer than what happened. Nothing could extinguish the light that entered my life that night. I'm not exaggerating when I say I know the consequences of this path, and perhaps that's exactly why I haven't yet had the courage to share this testimony publicly, but I needed to write it. I needed somehow to tell this story, even if no one knows who I am, because keeping all this to myself would be like denying once again the one who answered me when I cried out. I'm not here to convert anyone, nor to prove anything to anyone. I just want to share the truth that reached me when I was on my knees in the darkness, not knowing who to believe. It was in that instant that he came. Without ceremony, without explanation, he simply appeared. Notice, he just arrived. I haven't set foot in a church yet, not for lack of desire, but out of caution. There's one very close to where we live, small, made of dark brick, with simple stained glass windows. I've walked by a few times just to observe. One day, the door was open. I sat on the stone bench outside and stood there for about 15 minutes, gazing at the light filtering through the stained glass windows. It was twilight, the sky tinged orange, and a soft chant came from inside. It was the first time since leaving my country that I felt peace. Not the fleeting peace that comes and goes, but a deep physical peace, as if my entire body had finally stopped fighting. I thought about going in, but I couldn't. I was afraid. Not afraid of others, but of myself, of what it would mean to cross that line of no return. So I closed my eyes and whispered a simple, sincere prayer. Lord, I don't know how this is done, but I'm here. My daughter Noura notices my silent struggle almost every day. Sometimes she sits with me on the living room floor and reads aloud from the gospel, and I just listen, like someone thirsty, yet still afraid to fully accept it. I don't know why. Maybe because it means killing everything I once was. Maybe because there's still a part of me trying to protect old Yusuf. But every time I hear Noura say that Jesus said something, I feel a warmth rise inside me, and I realize I'm no longer fighting a religion. I'm fighting a calling that was born in the darkest moment of my life and has never left me since. Yesterday, as we ate breakfast, Noura looked at me with that calm but firm gaze of hers and said, "Dad, you need to forgive yourself." I froze, not because she was wrong, but because she hit me right where it hurts. I pushed myself too hard. I blame myself. I blame myself for having spent my life condemning the very thing that now sustains me. I blame myself for having built walls instead of bridges. And most of all, I blame myself for having done all this in the name of God, as if He needed me to defend Him angrily, as if the Creator needed me to yell at my neighbor instead of embracing them. The truth is, I didn't know how to love, not the right way. And maybe that's why it's so hard for me now. Because recognizing true love requires humility, and I spent decades learning to be tough, not humble. Still, I listened. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of each unspoken word, and spoke slowly. I've been trying a little bit each day. Today marks exactly 50 days since that morning that changed everything within me. I even marked this date on my calendar as if marking a new beginning. Now every 5th day of the month has a special meaning for me. Not out of tradition, nor religious obligation, but because it was the day I finally let go of everything that was blocking me from seeing the truth. And the strangest, or perhaps most wonderful thing of all, is that I wasn't even looking for Jesus back then. It hadn't even crossed my mind that such a thing was possible. I didn't expect it. I didn't plan it. I didn't desire it. He simply appeared. Not as an enemy, not as a threat or something to fear. He came as an answer, a silent presence, an outstretched hand in the midst of despair. And from that moment on, something changed inside me in a way that won't allow me to turn back. Not because anyone forced me, nor because I felt pressured, but because I simply can't. There's no longer room for the old Yusuf I was. That man trapped in the shadows of empty words, in rigid ideas that never saved anyone. Sometimes I wonder if anyone would believe this story if I told it openly. A Muslim imam, respected and trusted by leaders and the community, saying he saw Jesus one silent morning in a dark room, after a prayer said from the bottom of his heart. It seems absurd, I know. Perhaps it's even hard to believe, and perhaps that's why I haven't yet raised my voice in public. But what comforts me is knowing that God doesn't need spotlights or audiences to reach someone. He came to me in the silence, on the edge of the abyss when no one else could hear my cries. And this taught me something no book or sermon ever could. True faith doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers even when everything around us seems in chaos. It reveals itself in the moments when we feel ourselves sinking at rock bottom, when there is nothing, absolutely nothing left that we can offer. It was precisely there in that utter weakness that He found me. Not when I was strong, proud, self-assured, but when I was broken, shattered. And if He managed to find me in that darkness, perhaps He's doing the same for others I can't even imagine. Perhaps there are others hidden in their own shadows who never dared to speak that name until all they had left was the silent hope of a miracle. Since then, I've learned to slow down. I no longer feel the need to pressure myself or to impose a pace on myself or my daughter Noura. We live one day at a time, trying to discover together how to walk in a faith that is still new, uncertain, but which has already transformed everything around us. Sometimes when she's studying, I hear Christian music playing softly from her room. I stand in the kitchen listening from afar without saying a word. But my heart is there, responding to every note, even if my mouth doesn't yet know how to pray the way she does. I still stumble over my words when I try to talk to Jesus. But he doesn't seem to mind my awkwardness, because every time I open up, even in silence, I feel the peace he brought me that morning. A peace that can't be explained, but it's enough to keep me going, one step at a time. I walk without masks, without titles, simply as someone rescued from the turbulent waters of life. And even today, I find myself reliving that scene, as if it were happening all over again. The way he appeared, the silence that enveloped us, the serenity and authority in his voice. There was no thunder, no lightning, no grand spectacle. Just him there before me. And the phrase that changed everything. You called me and I came. The more I think about it, the more I realize how noisy my life has been up until now. Full of fiery speeches, rigid rules, passionate defenses, words that cut more than they helped. I rarely heard words spoken with love. And that's what destroyed everything I had. But now, albeit slowly, I'm rebuilding. And I know this journey is just the beginning. It wasn't humiliation. It was something much greater than that. It was liberation. But not a noisy public theatrical liberation. It was a liberation that began in the silence of my heart, when he showed me, without violence, without imposition, something I had been refusing to see for many years. He didn't force me into anything. He simply revealed to me what I feared most, the truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's no going back. Now sometimes I find myself looking up at the sky, alone on the porch, in the quietest moments of the day, and all I can say is, I saw you. I know it was you. And I won't forget. And I don't forget. Not because I want to remember, but because some marks never fade. They don't stay on the body, they stay on the soul. And this one, he wrote deep within me. I spent 7 whole days in that small house with my daughter. A week that felt simultaneously like an eternity and an instant. We didn't go out, we didn't receive visitors. We weren't distracted by anything external. We just prayed, cried, hugged, and most of all searched. We took the Quran and an old Bible from the shelf and placed them side by side. I said, let's really study this now with an open heart, without fear, without prejudice, without doctrine, only with the courage to seek the truth. She looked at me with tearful eyes and said, Father, I've waited my whole life to hear this from you. We didn't argue, we didn't try to prove who was right. We just read. And in the silence between readings, something began to blossom. Something that no argument had been able to generate before. It was then that I began to understand very slowly that Jesus didn't come to erase anything. He came to fulfill his promise. He didn't come to create another religion. He came to show a way, not the way of control, but of reconciliation. It was in this process that for the first time in my life, I understood what grace is. That which is not earned, that which is not deserved, but which is nevertheless given. With love, with patience, with depth. Today, every time I look at my daughter, alive, walking, breathing, smiling, I understand the magnitude of this grace. I saw her being plucked from the waters, and in the same instant, I was plucked from my own darkness. I'm still learning to walk with it, to carry this new faith, but one thing I know, I can no longer imagine my life without this presence, without this peace. And look, I'm not telling all this to impress anyone. I don't even know if anyone will read this. But there are days when it feels like all this will explode inside me if I don't get it out. I no longer have a position. I no longer have a pulpit. I no longer have a reputation. But for the first time, I have something I've never truly had. Freedom. Freedom to think. Freedom to doubt, to err, to question and still be accepted. Freedom to look at myself and not feel fear, shame or contempt. Freedom to look at God and not see a judge waiting for my mistake, but a father waiting for my return. I thought I knew God, but what I knew were the rules they invented about him. I thought I had faith, but it was fear. Today, even without understanding everything, I know something that once seemed impossible to me. Peace. And the most incredible thing is that this peace came from the very one I spent my life denying, fighting, accusing. It still confuses me. It still leaves me breathless. But at the same time, that's exactly what makes me certain it's real. Because no one would invent something like this. No mind, no matter how creative, would create a story so uncomfortable, so improbable, so inconvenient, and yet so profoundly true. Sometimes someone asks me, unaware, why have you been so quiet? Or, when are you going back home to your country? And I just smile slightly like someone holding something too precious to be explained in a few words. I say I'm reorganizing my life, and it's the truth. I'm reorganizing everything. My way of praying, speaking, thinking, even breathing. It's as if I'm learning to exist again, with a new foundation. And you know what's most ironic? None of this has been difficult. The hard part was before. living carrying that weight without knowing it, defending ideas that suffocated me without realizing it, living out of obligation and not love. Today, even with fear, I feel lighter. Even with doubts, I feel peace. And even without answers, I feel direction. If someone ever asks me what really happened, maybe I'll tell them. Maybe not. Not because I want to hide it, but because some experiences are too sacred to be thrown to the wind. Even if no one ever hears my voice telling this story, no one can take from me what happened. That night, I cried out, and he came. Just like that. Since that day, I haven't seen him again. Not in dreams, not in visions, and to be honest, it still leaves me torn. Part of me wishes I could see him again, hear more, have more answers. Know why with me? Why like that? Why at that exact moment, in that room, that early morning? But another part of me already understands that he came when he was needed, and that even in silence now, he is still with me. That is enough. But little by little, I began to understand something even deeper. Perhaps it's no longer necessary for him to appear again in the same way. Perhaps not because he's moved away, but because he's already done what needed to be done. Jesus didn't come to me to satisfy my curiosity, nor to offer me a manual of answers. He came to save me, to save my daughter from imminent death and free me from a prison I'd built myself over the years. I still carry doubts, yes. There are days when I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart heavy, wondering if I'm dreaming all this. But the difference is that now, even with the uncertainty, I've never felt alone again. Since that dawn, there's a presence within me. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, but it remains. Silent, firm, constant. And when doubts haunt me as they once did, I close my eyes and repeat softly, "You called me, and I came." Because that's what he told me, and that's what he did. Today, it no longer matters what others think. It doesn't matter if one day all this comes to light and many who once admired me come to see me as a traitor, a heretic, a lost man. It doesn't matter if someone tries to erase my story with arguments, theology, or accusations, because I know what I lived. I know what I saw, what I felt, and what I heard that morning. And most importantly, my daughter knows it too. That's what matters. No speech can erase what God did in the depths of my heart. Perhaps to some, all this seems too absurd. To others, it may sound like an emotional fabrication or an escape. But for me, this is the only truth that remained firm when everything else crumbled. I was a man known for his faith, a faith built on rituals, rules, and speeches. Today, I am simply a man found in the deepest darkness on the edge of pain. And if anyone wants to call that weakness, let them. I, with all my flaws, call it a miracle. Yes, a miracle. Not one surrounded by lights, crowds, and applause. It was a silent, discreet miracle that crossed the room without fanfare. He walked through the door without knocking, spoke to me with words that tore at my soul, and then disappeared. Just like that, as if he had never been there, but leaving within me something no human explanation could reproduce. Peace. A peace unlike anything I'd ever felt before. A peace born not of explanations, but of presence. To this day, even though I lived every second, I still can't quite explain what happened. But I know with more certainty than anything I've ever defended in my entire life, that it was real, that he came, that he heard me, that he answered. And from that moment, everything changed. This story, as personal and intimate as it is, carries something greater than the two of us, my daughter and I. It carries a truth that can reach anyone sinking into despair. There is a God who listens. Even when you don't yet know how to call him by his right name, even when all you can muster is a moan, a whisper. When he answers, it's not to impress you, it's to transform you. And after that, nothing remains the same. No theology, no resistance, no pain. Because when grace finds you, it doesn't ask for permission. It enters and transforms everything. And now I want to ask you, what about you? Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever had that moment when everything seemed to turn upside down? Not because of tragedy, but because you were touched by something greater than yourself? An instant when for a brief moment you knew you weren't alone. If so, share it with us in the comments. Your story could be the answer for someone who's at rock bottom right now. And if this video touched your heart, if something inside you was awakened, don't let it pass. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and stay tuned for future testimonies. Because faith isn't born from what we hear once, but from what we decide to continue hearing and living every day.